Far beyond the edges of Earth's known space in the dark, cold stretch of Sector V9, the Dominion forces moved with precision and power, conquering planet after planet without resistance. Their warships large and sharp like silver blades in the void cut through stars and silence alike. The Dominion did not negotiate. They did not ask questions. They took what they wanted and destroyed what they didn't. In the war room of the Dominion flagship called Varnuk, the High Command gathered around a holographic map of their next target, a small blue planet listed in their ancient records, as Earth appeared in the center of the projection. The commander, a thick-scaled being with a voice like grinding metal, tapped the glowing image and turned to his officers. "It is time," he said. "The humans are weak, scattered, and behind in all things. Take the planet and make them kneel before the Empire." The others nodded. None questioned the order. Earth would fall just like all the others, but before the full invasion began, a small scout ship brought back something curious. A human soldier was found alone on a deserted moon base near Earth. He had surrendered without resistance and was now in custody. Inside the detention chamber, the soldier sat quietly, hands resting on his knees, eyes watching every movement around him. He was tall but not large, his frame lean and ordinary by Dominion standards. No armor, no visible weapons, only a faint mark on his right wrist which no one had managed to scan or identify. Outside the cell, Dominion officers laughed. One of them, a younger tech specialist, walked past and stopped to look through the force field at the sitting menace. "This a joke," he said, loud enough for the others to hear. They chuckled. In response, "This is Earth's defender," another added. "This is what stands between us and their planet." Someone else laughed harder. "Maybe he's a gift, a peace offering." They all laughed again, unaware of the calm, quiet awareness in the soldiers' eyes. He said nothing. He simply watched. He listened. He remembered every voice, every step, every panel and door. Later that day, he was taken to the command deck for interrogation. The room was large and filled with high-ranking officers of the Dominion. The commander stood at the center, his posture tall and firm. "You will speak," he said. "Tell us about your planet. Tell us about your defenses. Tell us how to break Earth." The soldier looked at him, but remained silent. The silence stretched long and uncomfortable. Commander narrowed his eyes. He raised a hand and motioned to a guard. "Remove his tongue." Then he said, "He won't need it." As the guard moved forward, the lights flickered for half a second and returned to normal. The commander paused, then dismissed it. The guard reached for the soldier. The moment his hand touched the human's shoulder, the lights shut off completely. Total darkness swallowed the room within seconds. Emergency red lighting kicked in, but by then it was too late. The guard was down. The soldier was gone. Alarms screamed across the ship. Systems failed. Doors locked and then opened on their own. Entire sectors went offline. The ship's AI began giving false reports. One officer shouted, "We lost the prisoner." Another screamed, "Impossible." But deep inside the ship, between the walls and ventilation shafts, the human moved like smoke. His memory had recorded everything during his short stay. Every exit, every sensor, every weak point. He didn't need weapons. He was the weapon. He reached the ship's lower decks where the power systems were held. The engineers there were unarmed and confused. One by one, he disabled them without a sound, leaving only silence in his wake. The Dominion had no idea what they had brought aboard. They thought they had captured a man, but what they had truly done was invite a ghost into their fortress. Soon, Dominion fighters in the hangars started crashing into one another without command. Systems misfired, lights failed, gravity flickered, whole sections of the ship began to collapse under unseen attacks. And still the soldier did not speak. He moved with purpose, calculated and quiet. On the command deck, chaos reigned. "Who is he?" someone shouted. "What is he?" The commander slammed his fist on the control panel. "I want him found now." What? No one could find him. Cameras showed nothing. Sensors were blind. "He's just one human," another officer said. "Then stop underestimating him," the commander roared below. In the engine room, the soldier removed a small chip. From under his skin, it lit up and began transmitting to something far away. The ship's systems began to respond to him. not to the Dominion. He had planned all of this. He had let himself be taken. Now he was inside their most powerful ship, and he had turned it against them, and still he said nothing. Not until the right time, not until they were listening in the silence between alarms and fear. A voice finally echoed through every speaker on the ship. It was calm, steady, and human. You thought I was weak, the voice said. You thought this was a joke. The ship shook as the main engine room erupted into sparks and smoke. But now you'll see what Earth sends when it stops laughing, and with that the lights went out again, and the real war began. Smoke curled through the Dominion ship as panic started to spread like fire in dry fields. What was once a fortress of order had become a maze of confusion. Red emergency lights blinked across the halls, but they gave no comfort, only painted shadows across terrified faces. Officers shouted commands, but most systems ignored them. Doors refused to open, and those that did led to wrong places or shut, suddenly trapping soldiers in between sectors. Some tried to trace the source of the malfunction, but the truth was more disturbing than any system error. This was no glitch. This was someone inside the ship bending its spine to their will. Deep in the command deck, the Dominion officers gathered again, this time not with laughter, but with fear. One of the bridge commanders, a tall, sharp-eyed alien, stared at the flickering displays, trying to understand the chaos that had taken over their ship. The human is controlling something, he said slowly. It's not possible, but it's happening right in front of us. Another officer slammed his fist on the table. We brought him in without restraints. We scanned him, but we found nothing. He was just a soldier, just a man. The first officer looked at the blank screen before them. Not just a man, something else, something trained, something prepared. He is not improvising, he is executing a plan. They began to realize the truth, and it hit them harder than any weapon. The human had come here on purpose, not to escape, not to survive, but to break them from the inside. Meanwhile, far below, Reed moved like a shadow through the lower sectors of the ship. No longer crawling through vents, he now walked confidently through silent corridors. He wore the armor pieces he had retrieved from storage parts. The aliens thought were harmless, but were in fact laced with nanotech and adaptive systems. From a distance he looked like a ghost, half machine, half human. His footsteps made no sound, and his presence never triggered alarms. He entered the communications room where Dominion officers had once boasted of their victories. Now he stood before their control panels and linked into their own channels with a simple motion of his hand. His suit lit up, and the chip embedded in his arm pulsed with life. An artificial intelligence locked to his DNA activated within seconds and linked to the ship's core. The AI whispered into his ear in a voice only he could hear. We have control limited but growing. Reed nodded. Begin priority override. Start with internal defenses, then oxygen sectors, and after that flight control. The AI responded. Already done. In 6 minutes their propulsion will fail. Reed continued forward, while behind him Dominion soldiers finally found the destroyed guard station. They moved quickly, searching every hallway, scanning for life signs, but the human left no trace. No sound, no heat, not even footprints. A group of soldiers entered the corridor Reed had just passed through. Their leader signaled them to spread out. Suddenly, the lights above them exploded, and the floor panels cracked open, releasing a burst of gas. Within seconds, all 6 soldiers dropped unconscious. Their armor had no filter against the compound used, a gas known only to human Black Ops missions. From a nearby screen, Reed watched the scene unfold. Calmly and without emotion, he turned off the feed and kept moving. He was not here for revenge, he was here for a message. And the message had to be burned into the heart of the Dominion. Elsewhere, in the ship, the Dominion commanders realized their ship was no longer responding to most orders. Flight control was disabled, weapon systems refused to arm, internal sensors gave false readings, doors were locking at random. One of the engineers shouted in disbelief, "Sir, we've lost half the ship's main system." The commander stepped forward, eyes filled with cold anger. "Find him now," another officer replied softly. "Sir, he's using our own ship against us," the commander growled. "Then burn him out, shut down every section, blow the vents, seal off power strips." But even as he said the words deep below, Reed had already accessed the navigation core and planted the first layer of his real plan. The ship would not be simply damaged. It would be exposed to every Dominion vessel in the fleet, every command order, every security weakness, every hidden fault would be copied and broadcast back to Earth. Reed moved toward the upper deck, now reaching the edge of the officer quarters. He bypassed 3 layers of security by rerouting power from the waste system, which no one ever thought to guard against. All logic and training, he was doing things Dominion engineers believed impossible. Not because of superior tools, but because of his mindset. Humans had always been underestimated in the galactic arena. They were not the strongest, not the fastest, not the most advanced, but they were something no other race seemed to be. They were relentless, they learned, they adapted, and now, Reed was showing that lesson to the most feared power in the stars. He entered a large observation chamber high above the engine lines. Here, he paused for the first time and looked out the window. Stars shined calmly in the distance, unaware of the chaos unfolding behind this glass. But Reed did not feel peace, he felt responsibility. He thought of Earth not as a planet, but as every face he had sworn to protect: families, farmers, mechanics, students, soldiers. He had trained for this since before he could vote, prepared for black zone operations that had never even been officially acknowledged. The Dominion thought they had caught a stray dog. What they had actually captured was a lion that knew the value of patience. Suddenly, the ship trembled again, and another explosion shook the lower levels. Reed turned and spoke to his AI status. The AI responded confidently. "Engine destabilized, communications redirected, secondary hangar breached. Their fleet will receive our signal in 3 minutes." Reed nodded and walked back into the hallway as Dominion soldiers ran in the opposite direction, trying to put out fires they could not understand. Inside the Dominion war room, the commander watched as system after system blinked red. Then suddenly one screen lit up and a live feed from their own internal cameras showed Reed walking through their corridors unharmed. Alone, the commander stared in disbelief. This is not possible. Then Reed looked straight into the camera for the first time. Not with rage, not with arrogance, but with clarity. And though no words were spoken, the message was loud: "You brought me here. Opened the gate, and now I'm walking through it." The Dominion officers stood in silence, no longer mocking, no longer laughing. The joke had turned, and they were the punchline inside the massive vessel that once ruled the stars with pride and power. Confusion was no longer a visitor, but the new master. The Dominion ship, once flawless in structure and feared across galaxies, had become a prison of its own making. Doors no longer answered to officers. Commands echoed into silence. Maps were unreliable, and systems twisted against their owners. The high walls of superiority that the Dominion had built around themselves were now closing in with every passing second, and at the heart of it all moved one human soldier, not loud, not angry, but precise and unshaken. Reed moved through the dim corridors of the upper decks, his suit shifting its texture to blend with shadows and lights. His eyes calm and focused. Read the flickers of data fed to him by the AI, now fully synced with the ship stolen systems. Every move was calculated, not rushed, not wasted. He was not trying to destroy the ship blindly. He was trying to break its spine and then show it to the entire fleet. AI's voice whispered updates into his earpiece. "Navigation core is unstable. Shield frequency has been inverted. External scanners are now ours." Reed paused for a moment inside a small chamber lined with Dominion tech. Once this room controlled flight paths for their entire sector. Now it was his. The screen in front of him displayed the positions of dozens of Dominion ships across nearby systems, all waiting, all unaware. With a few commands, he sent out a silent signal through Dominion frequencies, an untraceable pulse carried by their own networks bouncing from ship to ship. It carried more than data. It carried a warning. It carried fear, a clear copy of the chaos inside the flagship. Security feeds of Dominion soldiers running blind systems, failing officers shouting, Without words, the footage told a story, and the story ended with the image of a single human standing in the middle of a corridor, untouched, unstoppable, as the signal spread. Officers on other ships began to panic, not outwardly, not yet, but inside. They had seen victories. They had seen resistance. But never had they seen one human do this alone, inside their most secure ship back on the flagship. The commander stood in the war room, still refusing to believe what was unfolding. He barked orders to trap the human, to shut down whatever was left, to send squads into every level, but nothing worked. One by one, those squads vanished. Systems turned against them. Cameras went black. Heat signatures disappeared. "He's not just fighting," one of the tech officers said in a low voice. "He's rewriting how we fight." The commander's claws dug into the edge of the control desk. "We are the Dominion. We don't fall to one being." But no one answered him, because deep down they knew this was no longer just about one man. It was about an idea, and ideas spread faster than ships. Reed reached the uppermost deck of the ship, the command tower, a place no enemy had ever entered before. Without permission, he stepped through a locked door, now disabled by his AI, and entered the core command chamber. Tall windows surrounded him, showing a wide view of space and the faint outlines of nearby Dominion ships holding position. He looked at the control stations, all still lit up but unmanned, and he walked to the center, where a small projection table showed the map of Earth, now marked with attack routes and strike zones. Plans of domination drawn with confidence, now useless. He raised his hand and placed a small chip on the projection table. A soft glow filled the room as the AI began uploading data into the ship's central brain. The chip contained Earth's resistance protocols, defense algorithms, fleet positioning, but all of it was false data crafted to lure the Dominion into missteps, traps within traps. "This will take 3 minutes," the AI said calmly. Reed nodded and took a breath. Time was short, but the message had to be sent. A message not of surrender, not of fear, but of warning. He accessed the main Dominion broadcast system, the same channel used to announce victories across the Empire. He changed the encryption, restructured the security, and fed in the live feed from the ship. Then he stepped in front of the central camera, and for the first time he spoke to the galaxy. "This is not a threat," he said, his voice steady and sharp. "This is a reminder. You look at Earth and see weakness. You see one planet. You see one man, but what you forget is that humans do not bend without reason, and we do not break without reply." He paused and looked directly into the lens. "You captured me. You mocked me. You brought me into your fortress, and I turned it into a warning." Behind him, the projection of the ship's map flickered, showing fire across multiple sectors, alarms still active, soldiers retreating, systems collapsing. "Earth is not alone," he continued. "We are not scared of your numbers. We are not impressed by your size. We know what it means to fight with nothing. We know what it means to win with less. You may have weapons, you may have ships, but we have something you never understood. We endure." He ended the transmission and watched as it broadcasted across the sector through Dominion networks, now too weak to stop it on planets far away. Dominion governors saw the message and stepped back in silence. On warships floating near the flagship, captains listened and wondered if this was truly the end of their dominance. Inside the flagship, the AI finished its upload, and the main engines began to pulse uncontrollably. Emergency codes tried to override the process but failed. The core was now a ticking storm, and Reed had only minutes before the entire vessel tore itself apart. He walked through the shaking halls one last time, making his way toward the escape pod chamber. He had marked his exit hours ago, knowing this would be the result. A clean extraction after a message written in fire. He entered the pod, sealed the door, and activated launch. As the small craft detached from the ship, Reed watched through the rear window as the mighty flagship of the Dominion cracked from within. Fires burned across its wings. Lightning burst from its core, and then in a single silent flash the ship vanished into the stars. Consumed by the very systems it had trusted, Reed leaned back inside the pod, silent again. Mission complete. The AI spoke softly. "You understand they will come?" "Yes." Reed replied, "And we will be ready." The stars moved slowly outside the window as the pod drifted toward deep space where Earth's long-range scouts would find him. He had done more than win a battle. He had planted fear inside an empire, and now the war had truly begun. The stars drifted past slowly as Reed's escape pod continued its silent journey through deep space. The remains of the Dominion flagship were now scattered, debris glowing faintly against the endless dark, a once great symbol of power reduced to ash and silence. The message had been sent, the warning had echoed. And though Reed sat quietly inside this small pod, his actions roared louder than any army across the galaxy. Far behind him, Dominion vessels stood frozen like statues across the black sky. Not one dared to move, not one dared to fire. The captains watched the last image broadcasted from their flagship again and again, the face of a single human standing firm inside their most secure command center. The words still burned into their minds, not a threat, a reminder in distant parts of the empire. The signal reached planetary governors, high command centers, and occupied worlds. Each received the message at different times, but all reacted the same, with disbelief, then confusion, and finally fear. Dominion had ruled through strength and fear for generations, and now both had been shaken by one man with no fleet and no army on a small outpost world near the edges of the empire. A group of resistance fighters huddled in hiding watched the transmission in silence. At first they thought it was a trick or a trap, but as they watched the footage again and again, they recognized something they hadn't seen in years. Hope, one of the older rebels, stood up slowly, eyes wide and voice shaking slightly. "That's a human," he whispered. Others nodded, and something stirred in them, a thought that maybe the Dominion was not as untouchable as it claimed to be back on Earth. In the underground command base far beneath the surface, military leaders gathered around their main screen watching. As the signal from Reed's eye reached home, the footage showed his path through the Dominion ship, his calm movements, his voice echoing across enemy channels. A room once filled with worry and tension now held stillness and pride. The general leaned forward and said softly, "He did it." Another officer looked up from her console. "We've just received pings from several Dominion colonies. Sir, resistance movements are rising in 4 systems, and 3 ships have already gone silent." The general stood straight, his voice gaining strength. "This is the moment we move to Phase 2. Meanwhile, Reed's pod had been recovered by an Earth Scout ship and brought back into safe space. But Reed did not rest. His body bore bruises and fatigue, but his mind stayed focused. In the days that followed, he was taken to debriefing centers, clean labs, and secret meetings. But none of it mattered to him. The mission had been about more than survival. It had been about showing the truth. He knew what the Dominion would do next. They would regroup and retaliate. They would not let a single failure become a symbol that threatened their empire. So Reed prepared not with anger, but with discipline. He trained harder, studied deeper, and began shaping the next wave of operatives who would go beyond what he had done. He was no longer a soldier. He had become a spark across the stars. Dominion leaders tried to hold their power. They issued statements of denial. They claimed it was a one-time failure. They punished officers and shut down channels, but it was too late. The image had escaped the net. The story had become legend on one Dominion world. A young officer who had once laughed at the idea of human strength now sat in silence watching the footage again. His face pale with realization. "That was just one," he muttered. "Just one." In another system, a Dominion scientist reviewed the code left behind in their broken systems and realized it was not just destruction, but design. Every action Reed had taken was part of a larger plan, and that plan had worked perfectly. The galaxy had shifted. Earth began receiving signals from distant planets, messages of unity, questions of help, and whispers of rebellion. The world once considered weak and slow was now the center of a storm, not of war, but of awakening inside a hidden training base on the moon. Reed stood before a group of young recruits, all silent, all watching him with eyes filled with fire. He looked at them and spoke not loudly but with purpose. "They thought we were slow, They thought we were soft. They thought we would bend. Forever he paused and let the silence speak before continuing. But now they know what happens when we stand. The recruits stood straighter, their faces no longer uncertain, their hands no longer shaking. Reed walked past them, his voice steady. The next wave will be stronger, it has to be. They will send more ships. They will come harder, but this time they know we're ready back. In Dominion space, the Empire cracked quietly, pieces falling apart not from outside attacks, but from inside doubt. Captains questioned orders, soldiers hesitated. Officers whispered to each other in corners about the human, about the message. In quiet shadows of control rooms, the phrase became a curse and a fear. "Is this a joke?" they once said. Now they whispered it like a warning, and yet not all was victory. Earth knew the road ahead would be longer and darker. The Dominion still had fleets, still had power, still had allies. But they no longer had certainty, and that alone was a weapon. Reed sat one night alone on a rooftop of the lunar base, staring at the stars. He thought not of the mission, not of the glory, but of the silence between stars. The silence he had broken, not with noise but with will. The AI inside his wrist spoke softly. "You've started something. You cannot stop." Reed replied without looking away. "I don't plan to stop." He knew his name was no longer his alone. It had become a symbol, a weight, a promise, and somewhere far away in the dark reaches of space, a child born under Dominion rule watched. The same footage on a hidden device, eyes wide, heart pounding. He turned to his mother and asked in a whisper, "Can I be like him?" Mother looked at the screen, then at her child, and said, "If you believe enough, if you never stop, then maybe one day you'll be more." The story of one human had become the story of many, and the war that was coming would not be fought with numbers alone, but with the fire that had been lit in a single heart that refused to break. The stars no longer looked the same. Not after the message, not after the fire. Across the galaxy, eyes turned toward Earth, not with dismissal, but with questions, with wonder, with fear. What had once been a quiet blue planet hidden on the edge of known space had become the center of a growing storm, and it all began with one soldier who had walked into the lion's mouth and left it in ruins. The Dominion did not stay silent for long. They gathered their remaining strength, their fleets, their pride. The loss of their flagship had burned through their ranks like acid. Loyalty weakened. Questions rose and rebellions sparked, but still their high command pressed forward, desperate to restore the fear they had lost. The memory of Reed walking through their corridors unchallenged had become poison to their name, and poison needed to be erased. They called it Operation Silence, a full-scale invasion of Earth led by their most feared warlord, a creature known not for strategy but for brutality. His plan was simple: overwhelm, crush, burn the planet to ash, and scatter its story before it could take root on Earth. The warning had already arrived. Sensors detected the movement of dozens of ships heading toward their sector. Reed stood once more before the Council of Leaders, not as a soldier needing orders, but as a voice that now spoke with the weight of the entire defense force. "They will come fast," he said. "They will strike hard. They believe we are still what they once thought easy to break." One of the generals asked quietly, "Can we stop them?" Reed did not smile. His face remained calm. "Yes," he said, "because now we know who we are, and they are the ones who have forgotten." The defense plan was not built on size. It was built on information, on precision, and on unity across orbit. Stations, ground bases, and deep-sea facilities, every system prepared not for survival, but for message. Just like before, Reed understood. This was not just a battle, it was the proof that the first act had not been luck. It was legacy. As the Dominion ships entered Earth's orbit, they were met not with fear but silence. Strategic silence, calm, the kind of silence that comes before a storm. Then one by one ships began to fail, not from weapons, but from inside systems. Jammed doors, locked engines, reversed shields failed. The same code that had broken the Dominion flagship now lived in every system around Earth. Confusion spread through the fleet. Officers shouted over channels. Weapons tried to fire and misfired. Engines sparked and died. A Few ships turned and tried to flee, but the rest remained trapped, caught in a net built not of steel, but of human willing. Then came the strike. Earth's fighters, not many, not large, but sharp and fast, came from the clouds and stars, striking where it hurt, not aiming to destroy everything, but to remove control, to take eyes to blind ears, to cut the strings one by one. The Dominion ships burned not in bright fire, but in the dull fading glow of lost power on the ground. Reed led the command operations, his voice guiding every move, his instincts now trusted without question. He watched the battle not with pride, but with focus. Each moment carried weight, every decision carved into the future. One of the officers turned to him. Enemy flagship disabled. Awaiting boarding. Reed nodded. Prepare a team, but let me lead. I've boarded the small assault ship with a team of elites trained not just in combat, but in message. They entered the disabled Dominion flagship, moving through smoke and flickering lights. No one resisted. The crew had already surrendered, their spirits broken before the fight ever truly began. In the main chamber, Reed found the warlord sitting on his knees, breathing heavy, eyes wide, not with rage, but disbelief. You are just a man, he said quietly. Reed stood before him and replied, No, I'm not just a man, I am a mirror. I am what you chose not to see. The warlord lowered his head. What happens now? Reed looked around the room where plans of Earth's destruction still blinked on broken screens. Nothing happens now. This is where it ends. He left the chamber without violence, without cruelty. He knew the real victory had already happened. It was never about numbers. It was never about power. It was about belief. And now the galaxy had seen the truth. The remaining Dominion ships were taken, not destroyed. Crews disarmed, officers arrested. The war was not erased, but redirected. Earth made a choice not to become the next empire, but to become something else. A symbol, a stand, a wall. Between control and freedom, weeks passed and the galaxy changed. Worlds that once obeyed in silence now spoke loudly. Colonies once forgotten now sent envoys to Earth, seeking alliance and guidance. Not for weapons, but for courage in the halls of Earth's new defense council. Reed walked quietly, never claiming a title, never sitting in power. He did not want a throne. He had become something larger than position. A reminder that humanity was not to be measured by what it lacked, but by how it refused to fall. In a small planet far from any major route, a child walked through a village square where a statue now stood, not of Reed's face, not of a weapon, but of a figure walking forward, hand open, gaze steady. The plaque beneath it read, not just a man, but all of us. The child looked up at it and turned to his father. Is it true? He asked. Did one human really do all that? The father smiled and answered, not just one. A story begins with one, but it takes many to carry it. And far away, on a quiet ridge above the training fields of Earth, Reed stood, watching young soldiers train not for war, but for peace, built through strength, built through readiness. Closed his eyes for a moment and let the wind carry the silence. The same silence he had once broken. Now it sang with meaning. It told a story of change, of courage, of a galaxy that would never again forget what it meant to stand against fear. The legend was not carved in fire, but in choice. The choice to rise when mocked, to act when doubted, to fight not for control, but for respect. And as long as that choice remained, the story of Reed would never truly end. The end.